Walking in the Gold Coast is something I seldom do because I'm usually up pretty early and spend most of the day working in the loop. And when I return home, it's usually too late to really do anything. But recently, I had the experience where I had a Saturday morning to walk from my home to the local hardware store and coffee shop. And as I walked through Viagra Triangle, I was reminded of, oh, there were times when I would actually meet people for lunch or breakfast or hurry off to have some fun. And I was like, oh, I remember that feeling. And I was so struck by that. And I had a sense of awareness that, you know, when you're unhappy, it's okay until you're reminded and remember what it feels like to be happy. And then it's like, oh, that that can be kind of a startling experience. And perhaps it's just a fact of getting older. But I like to think it was an example of early onset happiness. Welcome, welcome to Illinois Bridging Awareness. I'm Stanley Smith at Illinois Bridging Awareness. It's kind of like we believe in everything and nothing. We're trying to make sense out of a world that seems to increasingly not make any sense. Maybe we're not supposed to make or try so hard to make sense of all this sometimes. Sometimes it can feel like we're living in the worst time, and people ask me like, do I think living in the worst time? And I I really don't. I don't really don't think we are. I think I think in the spectrum of bad times, we're probably in a medium bad time. I have a friend who she uses the term when fun turns to tragedy. She just gives the example of playing this kid's birthday party years ago, and um, everyone was having a great time at this backyard pool party until little Johnny fell into the swimming pool and almost drowned, and they had to call the ambulance. And she described that as a when fun turns to tragedy moment. And I was reminded of that recently, seeing a film, and one of the characters you just mentioned about how we sometimes need to find the good part in a bad story. Um, also the idea that our worldview in the West is very much the idea of good and bad and happiness and sadness, and that's not universally so for everyone. People in the West have a different, somewhat, or in the East have a somewhat different worldview, and I've kind of pared that down to the idea of the creation view and the emanation view. We're in the West, we like to get it done and accomplish things. It's more akin to the creation model as opposed to the emanation model. And also in the context of these worse and bad times, in college, I had an art professor, and she was always celebrating the art and culture of the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. And she said, contrary to the image and perception that people have of this as being a dark and dismal time, it actually was a time of great flourishing and production in art and literature. And she impressed upon us that even though things might be called the dark times, it doesn't necessarily mean that's so. But back to making sense out of this confusing time, we're following every plausible idea and every implausible idea, and part of that is what might be termed, following conspiracy. But we track most of these down and explore them, and I like to think of it's an exercise in imagination. Early on in my life, one of my father's friends who worked for a company related to the space shuttle, he made the comment once, just in casual conversation, about what they called vapor trails in those days, and he surmised that he suspected that vapor trails must have some effect on the weather or conditions, and we didn't really we didn't dismiss that or give it any credibility because we really didn't have a context for it at the time, my father and I. But I remember about 20 years later reading in the Wall Street Journal that scientists had done a study and determined that actually near airports and major urban centers, wherever these vapor trails were present, they did indeed see an effect on local weather patterns. Similar to that, about 20 years ago, I was in a meeting, a fraternity meeting, and one of our members got up and told a story about being pulled over for a speeding ticket in some rural town in Illinois. And he was hauled into court to pay a stiff fine or to plead his case. And he immediately called out the flag that was in the courtroom and pointed out to everyone in the room that the flag had this gold fringe on it. Actually, I have a flag nearby, this gold fringe. And he pleaded the case that because of that, the court was invalid because it was under admiralty law and not the civil common law. And everyone in the room, similar to the vapor trail conversation, we really didn't know what to say. I'd never heard of such a thing. And occasionally it would come up as, were you there when the guy gave the fringe flag speech? And then again, 20 years later, here we are with that story's still here and more prominent than ever. As we move into the Christmas time, I'm naturally reminded of the Christmas story. And of course, Christ and Christianity is probably the ultimate conspiracy theory. If you read through the story of the Bible, the story of the Hebrew people, it's like one conspiracy story after the other. And what do we really know about Christ? We know that he was Jewish, a Jewish gentleman, and we know that because, like any good Jew, he knew he could get anything uh, cheaper wholesale, and if you couldn't get wholesale, at least you could get it better priced by the dozen, and that's probably why he had 12 disciples. And what was Jesus guilty of in his time? Well, he was guilty of insurrection and for using the company car, and he was convicted of using the expense account to take the disciples out to dinner at fancy restaurants. So again, not much has really changed in our time. In all of our travels and travails, we take a look at whatever topic it is that's on people's minds. We've been talking recently about our purpose and our script and our role, our view of things and how other people see things, and kind of turning those around. We've had fun time with Jim Downs on the topic of words, and I am going to put it to him about the idea of creation versus emanation, and then the corresponding idea of the giving and bestowing. I think again, because we're in the gift giving time, again, the Western idea of giving and receiving, is it really comparable to the idea of bestowing or having something bestowed upon you, which is probably more akin to the God model? And whatever we're doing in our daily living, I did challenge people this week to be open and be aware of when there's a silence or a gap, and listening for the sound of the nothing, the sound of the silence, and being aware of it, and being aware in that moment that you don't have to do anything, solve anything. You just let yourself be for a moment and see what comes to you. The idea that we pray to God, but also the idea that God is praying for us, and we could, instead of praying, we could just listen for what God is praying for us today. Whether we're doing the dishes or folding the laundry, we can be contemplating God at the same time. And while we're doing that, we can have the awareness right here in Illinois that at the same time, God is contemplating us. He's actually contemplated us into existence and all of creation into existence, whether it's a creative force or force of emanation of love. If you would like to join us here at Illinois Bridging Awareness, we have a Saturday Zoom call every Saturday at 9 a.m. Central Time. I will include my email in the description of this video, and I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.